Hi, I'm Jimmy, and this is a video documenting the making of a niche historical indie puzzle game. If you enjoy watching the creation of a video game about obscure historical references wrapped in puzzles and mystery, then perhaps this is the place for you. Today's topic is props, the various doohickeys and thingamabobs a character might grasp, and the vast collection of posters and notices carefully pinned upon the walls that drive the game's story forward. Fair warning to all the watching. What you're to witness here is a crude and amateur attempt of a programmer to make something resembling artwork, like a toddler with a Tommy gun. I know just enough about art tools to be dangerous. Buckle up.
The plan.
Before operating dangerous art tools, plans must be drawn up, so here are some requirements. Make it out of necessity. All props being made here are to drive the story and gameplay. If it doesn't serve a purpose, then don't bother making it. Make it readable. As the prop is used for gameplay and no doubt a clue in a puzzle, a player should be able to easily identify or extract information from it. Therefore, objects need to have enough detail to make it possible to determine. We don't want one of us in the dev team intervening during a playtest to explain the triangle they're currently inspecting is really a representation of a Michelangelo masterpiece. Make it fast. Based on the narrative script, there are just over 200 props required for puzzles and story to actually become comprehensible. This means deployment of economic prudence is likely necessary if I'm to finish this in good time. Block colors instead of textures where possible, don't sweat topology or triangle counts, go fast.
It's tool time.
Tracking. Everybody knows the first tool required to make art is a spreadsheet. If I'm to survive crunching out all these assets, my brain needs some dopamine nuggets in the form of asset checklists to scroll through and mark each day, giving me that wondrous feeling of progress. Modeling. Next, the three-dimensional meat and potatoes. Blender. A program with more functionality than a steroid-addled Swiss Army knife, yet perfect for making 3D models. Texturing. For 2D textures, Affinity Photo is like Photoshop, but without the grotesque Adobe licensing. In fact, it's free now. A good tool for smashing out many timetables, notices, and any other paper-adjacent prop paraphernalia. Workflow. Here we will use Substance Painter. Unfortunately an Adobe product, but you can for some reason get a perpetual license through Steam. We will use this tool not for its intended purpose of painting models, no, but instead for some incredibly jank workflow we will discuss later. Audio. Some of our props are actually audio clips. Audacity is the only tool I know here, and with relatively few audio assets to author, it's sufficient. It has to have one of the most unbearable user interfaces, capable of making you want to give up a career in game dev and go and live in a cave, but it's sufficient.
Basic props.
Right. With the procrastination phase thoroughly completed, it's time to actually model a prop. First, we snag a suitable reference, pull on some wizard tunes and start making shapes. Here I'm struggling to comprehend the form of this beautiful 1940s cast iron radiator. You grab a vert, move it around, extrude a face, mark an edge as sharp, copy and paste, rinse and repeat, copy and paste, rinse and repeat. Now we generate multiple copies of the iron rungs. We stitch them together. Absolutely spectacular. This is my art now. Truly unparalleled creative freedom funneled through my furious fingertips. Finally, bolt on some of those little inflow water valves at each side. But the mind begins to wander. What about the internal underfloor plumbing system? Should I include that? Where would the boiler go? Would it maintain pressure over such a long distance?
Remember, onion boy, speed is of the essence.
Oh yes. So export it. I smack on a block color, perhaps a delectable shade of rhinoceros grey. Lovely job. Mark it off on the checklist and go again. Slowly, from the hours of toiling, a pile of assets emerges. Now we have what's known in the industry as an art zoo, a section of the world with all objects plopped down for pleasant perusal. We can utilize this mesh-based microcosm later when we start placing the props.
Unbasic props.
Unfortunately, not all assets can just be monotone color. Some must contain words, labels, or other additional information. In order to ensure legible text, I tried where possible to follow a consistent textile density for all the assets. Textile density is basically just how many pixels per meter a prop has. The higher the density, the more texture space is required, and the sharper it looks on screen. For all the leaflets, documents, and other props that a player will inspect, and therefore end up zoomed in massively on screen, we use a textile density of 4K, so any text on it should be easy to read without blur. A veritable dense feast for the eyes. I found a fancy plugin in Blender that lets you set your object's textile density, making it pretty easy to keep it consistent as I marched onwards producing props. Most textures were just laying out text and making some basic labels. Certainly though, 2D artwork is the hardest, as you can't hide behind any curtains of technical know-how. So I resigned myself to knowing these props would be particularly ugly and just pressed on, while murmuring,
"Just gotta make it good enough. Rich can paint over this later."
at some point I'll let him know that. When searching for references, it was enjoyable to occasionally stumble across interesting anecdotal stories of seemingly innocuous objects. For example, a certain brand of tin plums being strung together end to end with socks, forming a flexible ventilation pipe for a daring World War II prisoner of war escape plan. Not your standard use case for tin cans in my opinion. As for getting these textures into the game, due to using our custom engine with some rather severe limitations, we can only really load textures that are exactly 2048 by 2048 pixels in dimension. It would be inordinately wasteful to use a massive texture like this for a single tiny scrap of paper, so we are going to manually pack a bunch of different objects together and abuse Substance Painter to apply the correct textures to each object. First, we gather a group of objects in Blender, ensure they are scaled to 4K textile density, and then pack them together on a single 2048 sized texture. Next, we export them all out as a single mesh file. Finally, we import them into Substance Painter and use its image placement feature to plop each image onto the associated mesh. Et voila, a poor man's texture packing system. Rather annoying to make changes, as you now need to use 3 separate applications just to tweak a single texture, but it was probably still faster than building custom tooling in our engine. Of course, upon seeing this workflow horror show, Rich immediately convulsed. Further still, as he attempted to wrestle with all the various applications, whenever he wanted to make small adjustments to the text, a flurry of angry articulations escaped from his onion-shaped dome. At that point, I knew I was on to a winner. It's just bearable enough for us to make changes, while simultaneously winding Rich up. It is the perfect tool.
Prop placement.
After a few weeks of sweeping through the Excel sheet, and the art zoo now filled to the brim with a collection of squalid artifacts, it was time to soar among our blockout world of white boxes and generously sprinkle set objects throughout. Many prop placements were simple. Using the narrative script as a guide, just plonk them in the appropriate room or into a character's hand. Job's a good 'un. But some props are too detailed to just view from a distance, so we make a special inspectable object. This sits just outside of the play area and will pop up to the center of the screen when the player interacts with it.
Behold all those 4K density pixels in all their irrefutable splendor.
And that is pretty much the long and the short of the prop operation.
Final reflection.
There are a few neat tricks I learned in Blender later in the process, which I wish I had known before. For cylindrical objects, you can create a simple silhouette and use the screw modifier to generate the full object, giving you better control of the resolution of the mesh. I wish I'd found that out before making a vast array of plates, cups, trophies, and practically every other required cylindrical prop, but alas. Combining multiple objects together with geometry nodes lets you work more non-destructively. Rather than just smashing everything into a single model, you can keep objects separate to make future tweaking easier. There are a few pros and cons to our jank workflow for baking most of our text into textures. Pros: creative freedom to trivially draw anything when we need it in textures, like ink splotches, strange symbols, or just stylistic additions. It's easier on performance for the game, it's just a texture. Cons: Iteration times are slower. We spend longer making tweaks to the props. It would be significantly more work if we end up doing any sort of translation to other languages for the game. It remains to be seen how this choice will pan out, but I'm really confident that no matter our decision, we'll have likely shot ourselves in the foot. Finally, all in all, I'm happy we did so many dry runs of playing through our narrative in Notepad before committing to making all these props. There have been relatively few items just thrown out or drastically reworked so far as we have playtested the game. But that is likely enough prop presentation for one day. Please join us again next time for another glimpse behind the curtain for the development of our niche, mysterious, historical, unsettling, detective video game.